Hi, I'm Bonnie Kempke. Welcome to my studio and welcome again to Quilting on a Thread. This is episode 2 of my quilts journey. And what I'm going to do in episode 2 is I'm going to load this king size quilt on my Cutie frame. Now, let me tell you, I've started as I always start for every project before I load my quilt. I have my machine off. I have everything taken off of the Cutie frame and everything about it. I de-thread my machine. I take the bobbin out. At this point, I dust the table and I dust and clean the tracks and rails of my frame. And the reason why I do that is because you may not see the dust, but I guarantee you the dust is there. And you can find that the dust is there by looking at the chrome wheels, and you'll see a little shadow of dark on those wheels. That's actually dust that the wheels have been picking up from the frame. So I thoroughly clean the frame. I don't use water or anything else. I use brush and dry cloth, and I brush out any dust. I wipe off any dust. And then I take a broadcloth, a dry broadcloth, and I polish the wheels to get any debris off of the wheels. And that just takes moving the wheels along the frame with the broadcloth on the wheels and just polish the debris off of the wheels. Now, the reason why I do that is because those of you that have been using your frame for any period of time, you've noticed occasionally slip stitches, missed stitches, and things like that, and you find out that it's your frame has gotten debris in the tracker in the wheels. Well, if you leave that debris on long enough, it can embed itself between the rubber of the wheels and, the rubber of the frame and the frame itself. And it can become embedded into the track. And the only way to get that out then is to pull the track apart. I don't want to go there. I want to stay ahead of it. And I clean the wheels off for the same reason. Debris left on the wheels can work its way into the bearings behind the wheels. Then the only way to clean that off is to take the wheels off and get into the bearings. Again, I don't want to get there. So after my frame has been cleaned, then I go ahead and service trouble, my machine, my Cutie 19. I go ahead and she's already been de-threaded. I check the time on the needle, and if the needle is anything more than 2 or 3 hours on it, I'm going to take that needle out and replace it because I have a large project that I'm starting. This is a king size quilt, so it's going to use at least one needle, possibly multiple needles. So I go ahead and change the needle. In changing the needle and changing the thread, I do all of the maintenance that might normally need to be done. I oil the machine, I oil the bobbin race, I clean the bobbin casing, and I clean the tensioners. I make sure that everything is as new as possible. Because I have rethreaded the machine, I use a sample little piece of quilting and I check the tension. Because when you clean the tensioners, you need to loosen the tension up to 1, and you floss in there and get anything out of it, and then you have to set the tension back. But there's always the chance that you don't get it set back exactly. So before I even load my quilt, I check the tension. And I do that by putting the machine in manual and just laying my demo quilt swatch out, run it in manual, because if your tension is off in manual, it's going to be off in any kind of regulated mode. So it's best for me, I've found, to get the tension right in manual, because then it's going to be more likely to be correct in regulated mode. Is that an absolute? No, it's not. So once I load my quilt, I will run along the side of the quilt to check the tension as well. But at least being halfway there is better than starting from scratch. So now that I've gone ahead and done all of that, I'm ready to load the quilt. So I've laid the quilt across the body, across the body of the frame. And what I'm going to do with this quilt is I'm going to quilt the field before I quilt the border. And the reason why I want to do that is because I have a very wide border, and I have this planned quilt pattern that I'm still investigating whether it's going to work on both the front of my quilt and the back of my quilt. Because if you'll remember from episode 1, I had to patch a backing, and so it's not a solid backing. So on the front, I have this 4 block by 4 block medallion pattern, if you will. And on the back, I have a disappearing 9 patch. The blocks are all different sizes, so the chance that my pattern that I have dreamed of, that my stitching pattern that I've been dreaming of, the chance that that's not going to work is probably very large. I may have to adjust my pattern, but if I don't have to adjust my pattern, I have a wonderful plan for a fill using a new ruler that I've gotten. This is Twirly by Handy Quilters, and I'm looking forward to using this ruler. So I'm hoping my medallion will work, but I won't know until I get to that point. So let's go ahead and get to loading the quilt. I'm going to put you on pause, and I'm going to change the orientation of my camera, and I'll be right back. All right, I'm back, and I think you can see most of my frame. I've been playing around with the quilt, just kind of getting it into position so that I can start loading it. So I'm trying to rest the bulk of my quilt on the front rail of my Cutie hoop. So it may slip and I may have to readjust it, and we'll play that by ear. As you'll recall, I'm using a homemade leader cloth. So what I want to do, the first thing I want to do is make sure that my machine is off. I never try to load my my quilt with my machine on. I don't want to accidentally hit a button and start sewing. And I definitely don't want to sew my hand. So I get the leader cloth up under the hopping foot. Happens to be a ruler foot because I'm going to be doing a lot of ruler work. And as I mentioned in the prelude to this, I'm planning on quilting the body, the field of the quilt, before I quilt the borders. So what I'm going to do is position my quilt so that, it's a king size quilt. It's a little bit to manage. So what I'm going to do is position my quilt body under the needle, but I'm not going to lower the needle on it because I'm just loading the frame. So I'm just trying to get positioned to where I'm at the top of the field of the quilt. So this is the field of the quilt, and these are the borders. So there's 4 borders, and then I'm in the field. And the field's a repeating medallion of 4 by 4 blocks. 4 blocks by 4 blocks. And they're all 4 inches long, so the medallion is 16 inches. So once I get to where my machine head is in the field of the quilt, now I'm going to move everything over, and I like to avoid hitting the frame. So I'm going to bring this over enough that I'm not hitting the frame with my carriages, but so that I'll still preserve as much quilting space as possible. So here's where I hit the frame. So I'm going to come over an inch or 2. that's about where I want my quilting to start. Now I have a basting pin here, so I want to take that basting pin out, toss it over into my bowl, and I'm going to get over here to where the head is not bumping against the rear, you know, where my needle is not bumping against the rear, and I'm not bumping against the side. So I want about an inch out from each place. I am not going to lower my needle right now because I'm not ready to do that. But I put a little weight, and these are beads. These are weights that I made. There's a pound of beads in here. And I just use that because that holds my quilt in place for me to reach over here and grab my clips. So I can kind of cradle the clips in the hammock of what's left of the quilt. I mean, what's, you know, the quilt. Now this is taking me a lot longer because I'm talking to you while I'm going through it. This is usually about 5 minutes to load my quilt the first time. And then shifting the quilt, depending on the weight of the quilt and the size and what kind of shifting I'm doing, usually takes me 2 to 4 minutes. But shifting this quilt, being that it's a king size quilt, it's going to be pretty extensive. So it's a lot to maneuver. I have a feeling it's going to take longer. Always use so the back clips on the Cutie frame, there are 3 of them. Always be sure that you can read the Cutie. And the reason why you want to read the Cutie label is those elastics in the back need to clip over here. There are some people that have found a way to remove the clips, the elastic clips, and use other things like larger quilt clips, or even picnic clips for your picnic table and stuff like that. I'm not ready to do that yet, but I've been playing with that idea. So I'm going to get my first clip in place. I'm kind of where I want to be, and I'm just going to go ahead and clip that in place. Make sure that it goes over the entire bar because there's a lot of bulk in this quilt. And then I want to take a ruler, and I just want to make sure that what I'm doing is I'm going against the seam here and measuring from the clip back to see if that's even. And that's pretty level. So that being the case, I'm going to go ahead and rest that ruler here, and I'm going to move down and do the next clip. Again, being sure that you can read the Cutie. Put that clip in place. Do any adjustment, like this end pulled a little. Do a little bit of micro adjustment, reclip. Bring my measuring ruler over here and see if, yeah, it's still out. So, oops, don't let my quilt fall on me. Declip that and readjust it. And do a little bit more measuring. Pretty close. A little tug here will take care of that. And then put the third clip in place. And do a little measuring. A little bit of tug. One last little adjustment, and I think that'll be right. I have found that if you don't measure and make sure that you're level, now you're never going to be level as you work. So it's, especially because of the structure of this quilt, it really is important that I get everything as level as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be pretty close. Okay, so now that I've done that, take my ruler out of the way, and I'm going to go ahead and unroll my quilt body. Because this is such a large quilt, I'm going to let it rainbow off of the frame, and the waterfall off of the frame. And the reason being is that's just too much weight to be worrying about. Take that weight out of the way. So everybody always forgets this, so I'm going to come around to the back and I'm going to roll my quilt. I have cords in my leader cloth, and that helps me roll. And I like my roll to be really, really tight, and so that helps. Now I take the elastics and I bury them between the clip and the roll of quilt on top of the back rail. I do that because I don't want to run over those elastics. This quilt is really large and heavy. So a lot of it is going to be, I'm removing my basting pin. And again, you want to be able to read the Cutie. What I find with these is really easy if you clip one end and then walk them down. I'm going to go ahead and remove the basting pins that are in my field. And again, clip one side and just walk it down. Now the cool thing about these is they will ratchet, and that'll tighten your bed of your quilt up. And you see how nice and easy my machine goes. It's not grabbing on anything. So that's where I want to be. Now I get the side clips. And side clips go here. And they will also ratchet. To help you tighten up. But now I am hooped. And the great thing about this is I can just about do 2 full medallions. But that's loading the quilt. And you do want that, you can see that. You can see that there's some give and tension, but there's not a lot. You want some of that, but you want it to where as you come forward, you're not like struggling with the quilt body. You want to be able to move freely. And if when you come forward, you start feeling tugging, your quilt body is a little bit too tight. If it is, unratchet this. And that'll loosen it up some. So when I move forward, I may, on this quilt, because of the size of this quilt and the weight of this quilt, I may have to unratchet when I come forward. And that's okay. That's the beauty of this frame, is that I can set up to work here, and then when I get more towards the front, I can readjust so that I'm free to work in this area. I can move it back and ratchet it again. You're going to find that having a hooping frame is as comfortable or as uncomfortable as you want to make it. So that's loading my frame, loading my quilt on my frame. And now that my quilt is on my frame, this becomes what I call my quilting, because it's my cutie with a quilt. Thank you for joining me here on Quilting on a Thread, and hope to see you soon. Bye.